All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us after your lunch. We feel honored that you join us after your lunch. Hopefully, we wake you out of your food coma. Today, we're going to be talking about security, compliance, and conditional access on Mac OS. Conditional access is becoming a must or a requirement for a lot of insurance purposes and just for your own security. But your users want to have that seamless Apple experience on their devices that they come to expect. That's why they choose to have an Apple device. So what we're going to talk about is how they can get that rich Apple experience on device while still ensuring that the device is secure and compliant. My name is Bryce Carlson. I'm a product manager at Adigy, and I'm joined by my coworker, Jorge.
Good afternoon.
We're both from coastal cities. We've been enjoying Brighton, which is another coastal city, slightly different than the coastal city that George is used to, a little bit warmer there. So,
no hoodies over there.
Yeah, no hoodies. You don't need, it's 100 degrees all the time. So I know this is kind of a joke fact. 99% of the devices that you have in your estate aren't yours because yours is in your hands and the rest are out of your hands. And 100% of those could be a threat vector because you don't have control over it. And 56%, according to Bitdefender, increase in Trojan activity from 2020 to 2021. I don't put that up there as like a scare tactic, but just to show that these devices are becoming more popular, as they should be. It's the reason that we've all picked to use them, and we prefer them in our use cases. But as they become more popular, that's going to be a point that's going to be targeted because more and more people in important positions or that have data that's important to you or your organization are going to have those. So what we're talking about today is to ensure that you can stay on top of that because the best defense is being offensive. It's making sure that you're having those devices in a good state. So we're going to talk about 4 layers of security. This is going to help you get the full picture of where your devices are at. So the first layer we're going to talk about, everybody's favorite topic, system updates. We're going to talk about how those are being pushed out via MDM and, making sure that those get updated because if the if the system isn't up to date, what's the point of any benchmark? If it doesn't have a benchmark that it's going to meet because the OS is out of date, no matter what you have in your benchmark outside of that, it's going to be irrelevant. The next is your security controls, things like your compliance reporting and monitoring on devices, knowing what state the device is in. So we're going to take a look at some of the benchmarks and how that is looked at on these devices so that you can report on that. Next, we're going to talk about end user visibility. We always make the joke of, the problem exists between keyboard and mouse. It's the user. That's the problem. The devices would be perfect otherwise. Well, maybe if we give the users a chance to be part of that conversation and see where the device state lay, maybe they could help us make sure that these stay compliant and they're informed about how the device is used and how to keep it secure. The last layer we're going to talk about is conditional access, specifically Microsoft Azure conditional access, and how we can integrate with that to ensure that if the device, all else fails, it's not secure anymore, we can revoke content to the revoke access to the content that matters most to us. So first, everybody's favorite, system updates via MDM, the building block of what makes the device secure. We all know this icon. Thank you. We all know this icon. I'm sure that we also all get nightmares when all of a sudden the notification shows up because we know that that means we've got some work to do. So the goal, though, is where we want to get these devices to the point that when you see that notification, you're not worried about the update. It's kind of like the movie from the 60s, Dr. Strangelove and How I Learned to Love the Atomic Bomb. We're going to hopefully learn how to love system updates. Oh, I forgot to make it flash. Got to wait for the build to finish.
It's a lot of updates.
Oh. Yes. Well, one very important update, the RSR update that we all know and love. So if you've been living under a rock for the last month, Apple released their first RSR update. We heard about it today in Apple's session. it's a good thing that these updates exist because it allows us to get these devices patched sooner than waiting for an OS update itself. But again, we want to make sure that devices are getting that update immediately. The good news is those system updates via MDM with the framework that exists today to push those out, we saw those updates going out immediately on day one, an iOS example and a macOS example there, because those updates are critical to get on the device. We're going to talk in just a few slides here about the process that makes that possible, but first I want to talk a little bit about the system updates via MDM as a whole, what it is, how it works, and why we are here using these. So the what is simple, it's in the title, but the how is a little bit more nuanced. So they're device channel MDM commands that are sent out to the device that actually go and cause that update to take place. The first part of that is a available OS update command that MDM queries the device with. So we're going out to the device and saying, hey, device, what are you seeing from Apple's CDN? These are the different updates that are available for this Mac, and then that's sent back in an array. We then take that data and say, okay, what, based off of the settings, which you're going to see on the next slide, do we want to update that device to? Is there a certain version that we don't want to push that device with a command past that? How do we want to prompt the user, et cetera? Then the question is, well, why are we doing this? Why can't we just use the binary like we always have used? Well, starting with macOS Big Sur and up, at the last 3 WWDCs, Apple has talked at length in their state of management how these commands are now going to exist to do these updates. And if we look to where the hockey puck is going, if we're skating to where that's going, as the platform changes, as we go to silicon devices versus Intel, as we have secure boot, bootstrap token, if you go back a little bit further, and whatever comes next for these platforms, Apple's kind of communicating that to have these updates blessed and anointed and installed on the device, and to make sure that you're getting those firmware updates in between with any different changes in that product key, you're going to need to be pushing these updates via MDM sometime soon, probably. So that's kind of the what, how, and why.
I would say,
Yeah.
I'm happy
Yeah.
about that, right? Because in the past, you had the PKG version of all this, which would mean that, sure, we had a little more control over it because we were doing it ourselves directly, but we were also competing against this. So while Apple's telling their user to please update your OS, we're trying to also do that on the side, or maybe try to even to prevent that. So I'm really happy from a user experience standpoint that we're actually using Apple's sort of first-class citizen sort of framework for this. So I'm extremely happy from just a UX standpoint and what we're going to offer in our app.
Yeah. Now, that goes without saying, a lot of this has been a point of focus lately when it comes to troubleshooting these updates, because if it's not installing on the device, you need to figure out why. One of the things that we've found successful for that is ensuring that we're giving the device as many opportunities as possible to run these updates. So, the device is in user hands. They're actively in the field. The device could be getting put into power nap. The lid is shut. Doesn't have 50% battery. The device is never above 50% battery because the user never charges it. A lot of different things that can lead to not having opportunities for that to run. And then on top of that, making sure that monitoring the MDM client and software update daemon is happening. Sometimes those agents might get disconnected because the user shuts the lid, or they change networks, or the download time is out. They're on a bad network. There's a lot of variables that can play into it. So the bottom line is architecting it in a way that we can give the device more chances to attempt that. This has helped a lot just in our testing and what we've been seeing with customers that have been using this and rolling it out now. And we'll get into some of the settings more now of how that actually functions within the UI. So how we're having that pushed out in the policy is we're saying, okay, let's set a max version. There's an option to resend the command, enforcing how that's going to go out to the user, how it's going to be presented, and then when we're going to schedule that. I'll make these larger now so you can see. I remembered my builds. So you could set your max version, and you'd say, okay, this is the last and latest version that we're going to push an MDM command to. Now, this does not mean that that's going to hold the user at that version. If the user has admin rights, They can go into system preferences and run it. There are other components that can be laid down to stop that from happening, such as the MDM profile to defer those updates for up to 90 days. So that's one other thing that you could do if you want to hold it at a specific version. You could put that profile out. There's also different process blockers that look for the installer itself if they're doing like a major version update. The next thing then is how are they going to get that update? So here in this dropdown, you can see default is selected. There's also an option to do it install later, where it will prompt the end user to pick a time, kind of, you'll see the option on the next slide, of what time they want the update to run. And then you also see a force install where it's just going to go. It's not going to give them a countdown. The other thing to keep in mind here is that retry box then. So when we see the MDM command go out, 24 hours after that, if we haven't seen a state change and it's still not installed, we're going to again resend that command after monitoring the MDM client and software update daemon. Because if those, for some reason, lost connectivity or couldn't complete that update, we want to try that again, because again, giving it another chance to install that update. The last thing then is the schedule, because obviously you don't want to interrupt the end user any more than you have to. So you pick the days and hours that are allotted in device time, not portal side, but device time, when you want that to run, and also give it a time limit of when you want to stop sending those commands. So that's great, but what does the end user see? So if they pick that install later, this is going to use the Apple native UI and go and say, hey, you have an update. You have X number of deferrals. That's a value that we're passing in that schedule OS update command. And it's going to say, pick a time. Do you want to do it now? Do you want to do it later or remind me later in the next day? If the user picks, try tonight or remind me tomorrow, that's actually going to kind of set a timer on the device itself, not within MDM. That's going to say, hey, I want to go and try this again when the device meets these criteria. It'll prompt the user and go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to try again at this time. That is not going to be an MDM command being resent. That's on the device itself. For the default option, they're going to get the animated one there on the right side. That's actually going to give them a countdown for 60 seconds. It's not a value that can be passed within the MDM protocol. That's just the default on the system. If they click on that notification, it will halt the process and bring them to system preferences. If they then go ahead and reboot after that, or they go and do the update, that would take care of that. But if they halt it there, it's not going to happen as long as the device is still in that state. So that's, again, why we're resending and retrying that command. One thing I do want to note, and I'm sure there'll be Q&A questions on some of this at the end, but for macOS 13.4 Beta 2, which this is out now, 13.4 is public, there were improvements to the install later MDM command itself, as well as in 13.4 Beta 3 to the software update payload, to improve the reliability of the install later prompt. So one thing to keep in mind is we just got that update, so there hasn't been one after that, but that's an open and ongoing thing to continue looking at. With that, I'm going to pass it over to George, and he's going to talk about security controls with compliance.
Okay, so hopefully you've gotten all your system updates sorted. That's great. Now we're going to talk about getting the security controls defined and deployed to all your devices. At first, I want to just talk about the full picture of what we see in terms of security controls and what they should entail. First of all, you need to define compliance for your organization. Now, we can't do that for you. That's between you and your God, or your IT bosses, or your customers, or your clients, rather, or your cyber insurance. Just show hands, how many people require cyber insurance in here? That's about 25% of you. In the US, it's a lot. It's growing. It's been growing over the last couple of years. We expect it to come to the UK very soon, where more and more companies are going to be hoping for cyber insurance, and those cyber insurance companies are going to be requiring certain controls to be on your systems for the premiums to go down, or to be offered it to you at all. Once you've defined what compliance means for your company, and you have that benchmark defined about these are rules that we want to enforce on our devices, you need to deploy the remediations to all your devices. You need to deploy it to all your fleet, or a partial amount of your fleet, whatever that is. Plus, you need any new devices that come in the future. If some of us, with big enough organizations understand that some devices just show up in your network that you didn't expect, those devices should also be under the same compliance umbrella that even your current devices are as soon as they open the lid. Right? Oh, and one more point about remediations there. I mentioned the word remediations there specifically to mention that there are two parts of any security control. There's more, but there's two main parts of it. One is the part that checks to see whether the device is compliant for that particular control. And the other side of that, of course, is the remediation, which is ensuring that whatever we're testing against passes, so basically enforcing whatever switch it is. So in the case of file vault has to be on, you need to have a test that tells you, is file vault on? And you need to have another thing that says, turn file vault on. Those two things are important for Adigy, and you'll see in a few minutes why. But I really want to stress that it is important, and when it comes to reporting, you need both sides of the picture there. The third one there is you need to audit your devices against that benchmark. So whatever your set of rules, which I'm calling a benchmark, we're calling a benchmark, all your rules for compliance, you need to find a way to audit your devices to make sure, are my devices compliant in the manner that I have decided they should be? I need to be able to tell, hopefully at any time of any day, within reason, of course, but please let me be able to go in and see, is a particular device compliant because I want to know why, or what does my system look like in general? These are some things that I think that as an admin, you're going to need to know. And also, the other part of the security controls is that they do change over time. In fact, of course they change when there's a new OS. So already you see that how that test script determines whether something is on or off is different whether you're on an older version of a Mac OS and a newer version of Mac OS, and we expect that that change can happen at any time. So a new OS is coming later this year, of course. Those security controls are going to have to be updated. So when your devices move up to the next OS, I assume that you would expect that those devices would still be in compliance without you having to redo the entire thing. Also, those compliances, the specific benchmarks that we're going to show in a minute, the official ones, they do also update during the year on their own for just best practices, or it's just a piece of software and somebody discovers a better way to test something. Those do get updated, and Adigy will update those as well for you. So conceptually, I'll just talk real quick about what Adigy considers, how Adigy looks at this and how you would experience this within Adigy. And this is the last slide with no pictures, I promise. After this, there'll be plenty of pictures. Adigy, first of all, I wanted to point out that it's very important for me anyway, as a user experience lead at Adigy, to let you know that anything we build here, and our compliance story is no different, we really use our existing customers, some in the UK and some in the US, to give us input in terms of what is it that you need for us to build. And some of those customers are actually involved very early on in the process, even before a single line of code is written. So we're prototyping, we're asking questions, we're discovering, and part of that process involves end users. So everything you're going to see here today is a result of that communication, that dialogue between us and our customers. I'm calling it benchmarks and rules. We call it rules internally. It's just another shorthand word for the actual system control, or security control that we've been mentioning here. So from now on, benchmarks and rules is probably what I'm going to say overall. Adigy lets you, we offer within Adigy the easy way for you to just say, I want the full, in the case of a US customer, CIS or NIST. You can just turn on official CIS if that's what you're looking for, deploy it to all your devices, very quick and easy, a couple minutes, and when deployment happens, within 30 minutes, all your devices that were online will receive that and start testing. But we also have customers that don't need anything to do with such strict standards. They want really just a couple of things, that their own bespoke custom rules. We provide that ability as well. So anything from that entire gamut is possible within Adigy. Also, those benchmarks need to be easily assigned and deployed to your devices. It's sort of like counterintuitive for us to make it sound like this is easy, but then how do I put it on a specific device? And in Adigy's case, if you're familiar, it's very easy to define which benchmarks, which rules go to which devices. You could easily say, with this benchmark to all of my devices, this benchmark over here, and this benchmark over here. Very intuitive, and you could always come back and check and make changes at any point. Finally, in between, so we talked about fullness CIS. In the case of the UK, that would be Cyber Essentials. The full version with all the controls in place, or zero. In between those, we had plenty of customers tell us that I can't have either one of those. I need that full benchmark. Our insurance company is requiring it, but we can't have 100%. There's some controls that are just, quite frankly, too strict and would render some of our devices useless. So what they were looking for, and what Adigy provides, is a way for you to clone those existing benchmarks, deselect sort of menu selection, check or uncheck whichever rules you want from there to create your own subset, and deploy that instead. And finally, if you need to do both, and there's reasons why, a really good reason why you might want to do this, you can deploy the official benchmark to your devices, but also layer on any custom rules that you have as well. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second, or why you would want to do that. This is what those rules look like. Like I said, these are the US versions at CIS on the left and NIST on the right. CIS, I think, contains 77, 78 rules, depending on which OS you're talking about. And NIST is up to, this is NIST high. It's up to like 152, 156 controls. It's a lot. Very few people need this, but any US federal government does need this on the right for all their devices. Luckily for you, even if you don't need this, you can, like I said, clone either one of these, pick and choose which ones are interesting to you, which ones you require, and that's your specific benchmark. But the good thing is that for any rule that exists here, and I find it hard to believe that you would come up with too many, and I'll give you an example of what those might be, but most likely you won't need to create any custom rules at all or define anything. We have it for you, and these are all downloaded from the official spec for NIST and CIS. The nice thing about that is they're also up to date for you. I mentioned earlier that these things change over time. So Adigy pulls these from the official spec. We allow you to pick and choose which ones you want, deploy them to your devices. If there's ever any change to any of these rules, we listen for those, we pull those in, we incorporate it, and your devices continue to be up to date to the latest spec for that day. That's important to note. The custom rules that I mentioned earlier, I'll just briefly go through this, but the point is that a good example for this is, so for example, if you have Bitdefender and part of your compliance strategy is that all your devices must have Bitdefender installed, or any antivirus for that matter, you can simply create what we call a custom device fact, check for Bitdefender to see is it on or is it not, returns a Boolean, and you can create a custom rule based on that. Add that to any of your custom benchmarks, and now you have basically your own layered approach. You can say full CIS or NIST, plus also make sure Bitdefender is on these devices. And like I said, that could be layered on top of the CIS and NIST, all your devices will check. Another good example is make sure Dropbox is not installed. And another good example is that specific SSID, I only want my devices to be on this specific SSID or this other one and not anything else. That's another good example of a custom rule. So reporting, I mentioned earlier, one of the full picture things that I mentioned was you need to be able to audit your devices at any time just to see what is the compliance state of these things. Because I don't expect you to just assume that when one day you deployed the File Vault profile, I hope you don't assume that a week from now, oh, it must be that all my devices have the File Vault profile, just because I said so. I expect that you would make sure that your File Vault is turned on that machine, and for that, Adigy has a really obvious way to tell, is my device compliant? Not just File Vault is one example, but your entire benchmark will be tested on devices every 5 minutes, and we'll let you know when anything falls out. In this case, if you click that icon there, this is for a specific device. You'll be able to see which benchmarks are applied on the left there. In this case, only one. And these are all an itemized list of all the rules that were sent to that device and whether the device passed or failed. Everything you've seen up till now is already live in the product. It's already shipped. It's in beta, but all our customers are using it now. So far, that beta tag is going to be removed very shortly because so far everything is working as expected. This is in development, being tested soon. Not yet out, but it's really the next step and the obvious one. Besides the single device view, this will be the group view. So you could get an overall picture of your entire fleet, how the compliance is doing there for each benchmark, which rules are being applied, and which devices are succeeding or failing on that rule. And not just for your entire fleet, but if you want to know how the engineering department is doing versus the sales department, how one client is doing versus another client, et cetera. This will help you out really quickly. Like I said, it's available now, except for that last slide. If you want to read more about it, the technical documents are here. Trust this QR code. Bryce tells me he did it. I don't trust it. So if you want to write it down, you could do that too. Otherwise, you can come by the booth and we'll just point it out to you. And in true Adigy fashion, all the status stuff is available via the API, built in, free of charge. A lot of our customers just prefer to use the API anyway. Use it as you want. In fact, not only is all this available via the API, but everything you saw already uses this API. So Adigy has an API, uses it ourselves. So anything we do in the UI, you're able to do with the API in the same way for your own tools. OK, so that was the second layer, which was system updates. Next layer is end user visibility. So for us, we feel like best practice is to include that end user in your help in remediating these devices when they fall out of compliance. After all, that user is the closest one to the device, obviously, and potentially and very likely the one that is most impacted by the fact that this device is no longer compliant. Especially, we'll see later when you get to conditional access, that user may not have any ability at that moment to even check their email, and that's important. So instead of creating a ticket, they may be able to, and we're trying to help them remediate this themselves so that they could just get back up and running faster than anything you can help them do. So what does that look like? On the Mac, self-service will give them essentially the same visibility that you have as an admin in the browser. They'll be able to see exactly which rules are being tested on their device, which ones are passing. In this case, this is a very simple benchmark we just created with 4 rules. This device is passing them perfectly. This, like I said, checks every 5 minutes. These rules are itemized, like I said. And this is also an endpoint for Microsoft Intune, obviously. So this machine will be reported in Microsoft Intune. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But I did want to mention it because you see that red button down there says register device. What this will look like in the 4 states. So these 4 states represent 1 is the device in compliance or out of compliance, and 2 is the device registered with Intune or Azure AD, or is it not? These are the 4 states. And that's important to the end user, and they should know that because they won't be able to check their email unless they're in that green section down at the bottom. So they would easily be able to remediate the steps that they need in order to get to the green state and finally get to their email. And from that point on, honestly, they should be able to, as long as they don't mess with their device, they're green from now on, and they should be able to check their email forever. This is a more robust benchmark with the same view. A bunch fails, a bunch of succeeds. This is actually, Bryce created this. This is actually your Cyber Essentials set working on a device. In this case, the device failed. And of course, the other important thing for this view is that, yes, self-service supports dark mode if the user has dark mode, and all these visuals look great on dark mode as well. So big red danger zones to let you know that you're out of compliance. And Bryce is going to demo some of this stuff. That's going to be great.
Yeah, thanks, George. So now a demo kind of show you what that looks like real time on a device. So I'm going to go to a device in the devices page. I can go and see here, yep, that device is failing because the firewall is not turned on. So I'm going to go ahead, click on Live Desktop. That's going to go ahead and start a remote desktop session using the built-in screen sharing app using a tunnel. I'll use credentials that I have for that device. I'll unlock the device, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up self-service, terminal, and system preferences. So system preferences, you'll see firewall's turned off. If I go and check my benchmark, yep, no firewall. So I'll go ahead, turn firewall on, because it's quick and easy to show. And then hop over to terminal and kick off the auditor process, which is going to go and run on the device. Normally, again, that would run every 5 minutes, but for the sake of this, I'm going to have it go ahead, run, and complete. When that finishes, then I go ahead and refresh, boom, the device then is now showing that it's compliant. If I go back over and refresh my portal and look at compliance, the device is now compliant there too. So the end user is seeing exactly what the admin is seeing as soon as that takes place. And again, the point behind that is hopefully that device and that user might be able to solve their own problem if they know if it's something that they had a cause and effect. Maybe they started in a compliant state They did something that they had the power to do with admin rights, and then they wound up locking themselves out. They're a power user. They know everything. Well, maybe they can also solve their own problem with that then too.
And importantly, you didn't have to solve that problem.
Correct, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So where that then comes into play is, okay, how does that synchronize for our fourth layer of Microsoft Conditional Access? So you might have heard in the Microsoft session earlier this week, Neil was talking about the partner compliance management. That integration is what's going to allow for us to take that registration state that they're getting, which you'll see actually in just a few minutes here, an actual run through of that. Get that workplace join certificate, get it into the login keychain on the device, and then use that workplace join certificate whenever we go out and try and authenticate to Safari or anything in the browser that's hitting Azure or anything that's one of the Microsoft desktop apps, Outlook, et cetera, OneDrive. So it's going to go ahead and allow that device to sign in because this is George's device. That's the certificate that's been provided from the registration. Great. What does that look like for the end user? Well, if the end user is going to go through and open the web browser, they'll see, oh, I want to go ahead and sign in. They'll get a one-time prompt to say, do you want to provide that certificate? After that prompt, they don't need to do anything else because that certificate will continue to be provided as long as that keychain exists. If for some reason they are no longer compliant, the keychain gets removed, etc., it's going to bring them to a screen that if anybody here uses Azure, they're probably familiar with, because if it fails a sign-in, whether that be for a geographical rule or anything else, it's going to show up and say, hey, you're not meeting the rules to access this. You got to do something about it. If you click more details, it's going to drill down and show you all the authentication information, date, time, IP, etc. But in this case, it's because the device no longer was compliant. So if they go to click on the button to take more action on that, where it's actually going to wind up routing them back to is the self-service stuff that George just showed us. That way the end user can at least get a bearing of, why am I not compliant? Why is this happening? All I want to do is get my email, and it will take them back that way. So the registration process, which is a one-time thing the user needs to do, again, we'll go hop into devices, we'll pull up the device, which is Mac Mini in my basement, 3,000 some miles away. And I'm going to go ahead, open up a live desktop session, connect to the device, and then once I'm on the device, I'm going to go ahead and open up self-service. And what we're going to do in self-service is click that registration button. That's going to call Company Portal in a registration-only mode, and that is going to lay down the Workplace Join certificate. When I do that, because this device has the single sign-on extension pulled up and I had signed into office.com prior to this, maybe as part of my onboarding, whatever it may have been, that device will then automatically pull that user session. I'll click on my user. It's going to go ahead, pull that, create the certificate, drop it into the login keychain, and then after that, it's going to ask for one last sign-in where, again, it's going to just pull from the single sign-on extension just to say, do you approve the use of this certificate? And it's going to pull that in, and then I'll know that's George's device. George is registered. And granted, in this case, in this example, the one benchmark rule is being failed, but the device is registered. So from that point forward, oh, and I get confetti too. From that point forward, then, he'd be good to go ahead and access as soon as he resolves that compliance issue. What does that look like to the admin? Well, here we can see, okay, we got a device that's compliant, great. That device is going to show in Azure Active Directory. It's going to show the user that that device was registered with, and it's going to show when it was registered along with some other basic information. If that device falls out of compliance, or if it becomes compliant, whatever state it's flipping to, that's going to be reflected within Azure Active Directory, usually within 30 to 90 seconds, sometimes less, of that device actually changing state and it being sent through the partner API backend to Microsoft Azure. How is that working on the back end, you might ask? Where's the beef? What actually does that? Well, when you set up the integration, there's a one-time enterprise application that you're effectively granting the admin consent for, that is saying, we're going to allow that this device record that we have, that the company portal is creating at that point, we can go ahead and update it because we know that that Azure AD ID exists for the device. It exists for this user. We can post any update about the yes or no compliance flag for that user. This is in a public beta now. Again, the QR code is safe. I made it with Adobe Express because that was the best option to make the QR code. Otherwise, there's the link, but please do stop by the booth if you want to talk about that anymore or have any questions on how that works technically on the back end. So, in summary, what we talked about today and how to get a device into that more compliant and secure state. First thing, the most important thing, is those system updates, and also making sure that the end user has those system updates in a method that they're used to it, because they're more likely, hopefully, to go ahead and run those. But also giving that update more opportunity for it to succeed and run on the device. Then the official or custom benchmarks, however you're setting up your compliance rules, whatever matters to your organization, and getting that layer of security on the device that is telling you this is where it's at right now as of 5 minutes ago when it was online. This is where it's at, and it's running in the background with no other agent or anything taking place. It's just the inventory information that's being pulled from the device. That Swift self-service app that's showing the end user, this is where you're at. Understand, cause and effect of anything that you may do on that, but also show them the value that that's providing, if it's keeping them secure or not, so they understand what's going on. And then lastly, the Microsoft Conditional Access, so that you have the native access within the browser or the Microsoft apps themselves. With that, thank you so much for your time. If you want to come visit us at our booth, otherwise, we're going to do the AirPod Pro giveaway after Q&A if there's any questions. So we'll go to questions now.
And thanks.
Yes, and thank you.
Any questions from the floor? So let me kick off. There's a couple in the app. Which EDR product is best of breed for the Apple ecosystem?
Yeah, that one, I think I'd answered that one in the app, but the long and short of it is we integrate with Malwarebytes. It's one that AppleCare themselves use, but I've had experience with a number of different ones, commonly with the Microsoft integration. We'll also see Defender ATP out there as another alternative to it. It's kind of finding out what is best for the needs of your organization and how that fits.
Okay. Oh, we've got one.
Damn it. This is our CEO, Jason Detbarn.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
They don't even know I'm going to ask a question, but I was just going to say in the processes for the OS updates and MDM, maybe you could be a little more transparent on how we're working through that, shall I say?
Sure. So there's a couple different commands that are running in the back end that the agent's running to look at the MDM client and software update daemon to look at HTTP statuses as well as different things that are being logged. That's being looked at every check-in to see where that device is at and what those daemons are doing. If we're not getting a response back from them, that's where, back to it here, that's where it comes in to basically say, okay, I need to go and take action on that agent and either call it to unload and reload and get that to then start responding. And then after that, if the device checks in again, it's going to hit that retry window where it's going to send that MDM command update again, or the schedule OS update command again. And that's what we've been seeing the most success with to get those updates to go through, because it's just giving it more of an opportunity where, hey, the device just checked in 5 minutes ago. I noticed that the lid got shut on it, the device didn't update, lost connection. Let's try again because the device just came online, it just checked in. So let's go ahead and try again because it's probably pretty certain that device is going to stay online and be active for a little bit because it just came online. So it's just giving that another opportunity to go through and check in and do that update.
Okay, another one from the app. You mentioned the reasons behind a device not updating with an MDM command, such as under 50% battery, lack of space, etc. Do you have any recommendations to report on these reasons en masse across an estate?
Yeah, so within the UI in the product there is a space that will show the response that's passed back. Some of those responses are passed back in the MDM commands, not all of them. Otherwise, there are some log show commands. I do not know them off the top of my head, but those will pull through and say what was passed back from software update D and you could pass that back as a custom fact or extension attribute variable like that that would actually say, okay, you know, this is what we found when monitoring for this phrase that would show that. One of the things that we did see as part of pre-13.4 in an Apple feedback is also that the battery notification was happening on Mac Minis and iMacs, which do not have a battery because they're desktops. So that is also part of the thing that should be patched with 13.4 going forward, but we obviously need to get a version after that to see where that's at.
Good. Any more? So that's it for questions. There's a couple more, but they're probably best taken offline, if that's
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back on track. So 5 minutes. Sorry.
I was going to say, we gave our Jason here the task of coming up with a random number from 0 to 70 during the course of this call. And
Yeah, so I've got, put it up here. You do it on that one now. 12.
12, you want me to check? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. Not this guy. 12. Tanya Irwin Black? Is Tanya Irwin Black here? She is not here. Okay, we'll check to see if she's out on the show floor. She won the AirPods rather. If she is not here, we'll pick another number really quickly, or we'll give her some time, but if not, we'll pick another name and hopefully reach out to you via email. So check your email within the next 30 minutes. And if you won the AirPods, just come by the booth and we'll hand them to you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.